Generally speaking, I thought that the amount of time an athlete or a coach spent thinking about exercise was pretty overrated relative to the amount of time they spent thinking about the other 20 hours of the day. So there's this huge focus on what do you do during the 3 or 4 hours you're training. And then it's like, okay, you can do anything for the next 20 hours, but you've done practice, so you're fine. And that was kind of, maybe my naive mindset as a college athlete. But what I realized in doing research is that other 20 hours of the day was arguably more important. The way that your body was recovering, the way that you were resting, when you went to bed, the things that you put in your body, whether it be diet or alcohol, obviously, drugs, all these things would work the opposite direction. So understanding what you were doing to your body and how that affected your body and your recovery was really important to me. And so that's where my vision for Whoop was to be able to monitor individuals 24/7. I didn't just want to understand practice. I wanted to understand 24 hours of the day. And by measuring the body 24 hours of the day, you can understand these periods of time where someone doesn't realize the stress that they're actually putting on their body. So a college athlete, for example, who is taking a test in a day, like a written exam, actually is putting a meaningful amount of strain on their body during that test. Their heart rate's elevated, their galvanic skin response is elevated, and they're psychologically engaged, right? They're exposed to stress. That individual actually needs to have a lower workout to later that day to accomplish the same amount of strain had that test not even taken place. This is one specific example. We had a tennis team that we worked with. It turned out after practice, these guys would play ping pong for 2 hours. And in the process of playing ping pong, they actually put a meaningful amount of exertion on their body. Now, these things are all relative, but if you don't think of that as some form of stress or strain, and you're not measuring it, you don't appreciate that's the reason that your guys were flat the next day. So with Whoop, we're able to actually detect the effect of taking a test, the effect of playing ping pong, all these other things that you're doing in your life. Now, we're very specifically talking about college athletes right now, but I can tell you how this applies to a much wider audience.
Great. So let's go there. What exactly, what algorithm did you come up with that Whoop measures, and how does it work?
So Whoop is a wearable system that you wear 24/7, and it sends data from your sensor to a phone to the cloud back to a web dashboard. You can look at information on an iOS app or an Android app. It's really, really simple to use. Now, with that information, with all that data, we summarize the world in terms of strain, recovery, and sleep. Okay? Back to our conversation of overtraining. Overtraining is really just mismanagement of stress and recovery. If you think about stress, it's the amount of activity that you're putting on your body, the amount of strain over the course of the day that you're putting on the body. Could be in the form of exercise, daily activity, stress, right? That it's a measurement of strain. Okay. Recovery is how prepared your body is for strain. And if your body is more recovered, you should take on more strain. And if your body's less recovered, you should take on less strain, right? And that sounds so obvious, but the reality is that if you can't feel these things or measure these things, you're just playing blind. And so we're able to tell people with great simplicity, hey, this is where your body is right now, and this is what you should do to it, or you should do less, or you should do more, right? And that relationship, it turns out, has been phenomenal for professional athletes. It's been phenomenal for college athletes. And now we work with a whole consumer audience that are, people like you and me, Stephen, who are trying to function in our daily lives. We've got a lot of different responsibilities. We're executives, right? These are people who work out at the gym. There's fitness enthusiasts. They're endurance competitors. They're mothers and fathers, right? And they have to deal with newborn children or the stress of a family. So I'd say in general that human beings have to deal with stress and strain throughout their lives. And by managing the way that you sleep and the way that you recover, you can really combat those things. So again, Whoop measures strain and recovery and sleep, and we do that really accurately. The common thread that I see across all of these audiences, again, super high performers, is yes, they can go through, and yes, they can often get the job done. The question is, are they performing as optimally as they could be? And how can we make sure they're okay in the long run?
Yeah. So speaking of that, as you know, hormesis is a really good thing. That which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And in a way, that's actually what you're measuring. And I write about it in all my books. Where does hormesis play in all of this? You know, how much stress is good for you? And can you actually measure that with your algorithms?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's helpful for anyone who uses Whoop to understand, but probably anyone in general to understand, is having a day where you're run down is not necessarily a bad thing. Like the goal is not necessarily to never be run down. And in fact, you may want to push your body to a point where it is going to be run down. You know, Olympic powerlifters do this all the time, where a sign that they had a good lift the day before is if they're too run down the next day to actually lift. So that's a sign that they put enough stress on their autonomic nervous system to get the results to then recover to get stronger, right? And I think that's tying back to what you're talking about, which is there's a lot of ways that stress can be good for your body. And I definitely believe that. I would say that there's a whole separate concept from the physiological, which is potentially more psychological. And that's like, okay, if you've overcome something in your life, what does that then do for you? You going into an interview on no sleep or a bad travel or all kinds of jet lag, I bet you psychologically don't feel any pressure doing that because you've had to operate on someone under much worse conditions. That's more of a psychological benefit to what you're describing than I would call necessarily a physiological benefit. Now, the psychological can affect the physiological, which we talked about, right? If your mind is more at ease, then your nervous system is reflecting that. So these things are all related. And then I just go back to the value of being able to measure them so that you know the difference between being run down today versus literally run down for a week. Like we've had people on Whoop who literally had red recoveries for a week straight, and they didn't know what was wrong with them. And they went to go see a doctor, and it turned out they had Lyme disease or mono or these things that actually there's a delay to being able to feel. So that's where it's interesting, I think, to sort of separate from one day of being run down to a longer period.